In 19th century newspaper and court records, the West wasn't a movie showdown. It was railroads buying up land, homesteaders defending fences, sheriffs looking the other way, Pinkertons doing collections, and indigenous peoples dealing with broken treaties. And a lot of regular people paid the price. In the saloon, a card game could turn into a fight, and sometimes a funeral. Check out 20 real cases and you'll see how all of it worked. Number 1. Bass Reeves was born enslaved in the South and, in the chaos of the Civil War, escaped and ended up on the frontier of Indian Territory. There, living among several nations, he learned languages and trails that few outsiders knew. Years later, he became a deputy U.S. Marshal, a federal lawman with a work area bigger than many states. He brought hundreds of outlaws to justice and was known for doing things by the book. He turned down bribes, used disguises, and tried to make arrests without a shootout. On his belt, handcuffs; in his pocket, a Bible. He treated prisoners with respect, but he didn't cut them any slack. Decades later, Hollywood sold a masked hero with a white horse and a similar honor code. But the real model had a name, Bass Reeves, and a lot of people still haven't heard of him. Number 2. By the late 19th century, the big bosses of steel and railroads in the U.S. wanted order on their terms. When the police took too long, or when the government didn't want to get involved, they called the Pinkerton Agency. It wasn't just investigation, it looked like a private force. They escorted money, planted informants in unions, and put together reports on labor leaders. In 1892, during the Homestead strike in Pennsylvania, they came in by river to take back the mill, and it turned into gunfire and chaos. The public backlash was so strong that in 1893 the federal government put limits on hiring groups like that. And the question remains, when the people paying the bills get to decide who uses force, who's really in charge? Number 3. At the height of the California gold rush, a lot of people swore they knew a guy named Charley Parkhurst, a stagecoach driver with a steady hand, one eye lost in an accident, and zero patience for bandits on the road. At the stops, he was the type to lean on the saloon, chew tobacco, toss out a "you can bet on it," and move on. In 1868, he got in line, took a ballot, and voted in a presidential election, at a time when that, in theory, wasn't for a woman to do. When Charley died in 1879, the people who handled the body found the truth. Charley had been born Charlotte Darky Parkhurst. The town realized it had cheered on a rule breaker for years without knowing. And to this day, the question hangs there. Was it courage, necessity, or just the will to live free? Number 4. The Old West diamond scam. After the gold rush, a lot of people still thought they'd get rich in the blink of an eye. 2 guys showed up claiming they'd found, somewhere out in Colorado and Wyoming, a remote spot where diamonds and rubies were coming right out of the gravel. The trick: they salted the ground, scattering gems they'd bought far away and mixing it all in like it came from the earth. When bankers and businessmen arrived, they saw the sparkle, picked it up off the ground, and started signing checks and investment promises without really doing the math. The con fell apart when geologist Clarence King went out there, took a good look, noticed those stones couldn't form together, and told the truth. By the time the news blew up, the 2 had disappeared, and a lot of important people were left with losses and embarrassment. Number 5. In 1892, up in northern Wyoming, the big cattle outfits were tired of seeing small ranchers fencing off the same range. In saloons and at the Stock Growers Association office, a list came out of suspected cattle thieves, without proof, in a lot of people's eyes. Instead of a judge and jury, the bosses paid for a train and brought in about 50 hired guns from Texas. When the crew crossed into Johnson County and killed 2 men at a ranch, the news spread fast. Out of nowhere, merchants, cowboys, and workers formed a posse, cut off routes, and surrounded the group at the TA ranch, waiting for them to surrender. A telegram called for help, and then Washington's weight came down. Federal troops showed up. In the end, the men who got escorted out were the money men, and that stuck with the West. Number 6. Toward the end of the 19th century, on the icy roads of Montana, Mary Fields earned a nickname that said it all: Stagecoach Mary. She had been enslaved and, already over 50, took a job a lot of men avoided, carrying the mail on an isolated route near Cascade. She went armed, smoked cigars, and spoke straight. No fuss. If wolves, snow, or bandits showed up, she kept going anyway. One brutal winter, the wagon got stuck and the horses couldn't make it. Mary strapped the mailbag to her body and walked through the dark to the next stop. In the saloon, people said she was scarier than the sheriff. And what really became legend was how steady she was. Folks swore Mary almost never missed a delivery. For anyone waiting on news from home, that mattered more than any medal. Number 7. By the late 1800s, William Buffalo Bill Cody figured out you could turn frontier conflict into a ticketed show. In his Wild West show, he hired native performers to act out scenes the audience already expected. Wagons surrounded, gunfire, horses going down, and the ending was almost always the same: the white heroes coming out on top. In 1885, Sitting Bull joined the troupe for a few months. He didn't go to Europe, but he toured U.S. cities, got paid per show, and watched up close the same people who called him an enemy. They say that off stage, he laughed at the shock when people saw a calm indigenous leader. A lot of folks left thinking they'd seen the real deal without noticing the script, and that helped shape the West's memory for decades. Number 8. Belle Starr. In the late 19th century, when Indian Territory was a map full of back roads and not much law, she became talk among the folks. Born in Missouri, she learned how to move between regular people and outlaws without raising suspicion. Married to the Cherokee Sam Starr, she controlled land that became a support spot. Horses swapped, cattle stolen, notes passed hand to hand. People said she had ties to Jesse James and Cole Younger, and that she carried a gun. In 1889, at 40, she was ambushed on a dirt shortcut near home and shot from behind. The case stayed open. There were suspects, rumors, and fingers pointed, but nobody was convicted. Somewhere between revenge and fence fights, the mystery stuck. And that doubt keeps the legend going to this day. Number 9. Alfred Packer. In the winter of 1874 in Old West Colorado, a guy offered to guide 5 men through ice-locked mountains. They disappeared. Months later, Packer showed up alone in a town, way too well fed for the situation, with the other men's money and stuff in his pocket. He swore he had an explanation, but every conversation came with a different detail, and that set off alarms. When the police went back to the trail, they found bones, knife marks, and missing parts. In court, the judge dropped the line that became legend, that he had killed and eaten 5 Democrats. From there, the tragedy turned into a bar joke, a bad movie, and even the name of a cafeteria. But the question stays: was it hunger, a lie, or something worse? Number 10. In the late 19th century, When the railroad that linked the East Coast to the West Coast was still being built, not many people remember who took on the riskiest work. On the Central Pacific, Chinese workers drilled tunnels through granite, cut paths along cliffs, and lit dynamite in the snow. They almost always made less than white workers, and when someone died, sometimes not even a name was left behind. After the Golden Spike in 1869, the mood shifted. Instead of thanks, it was suspicion. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act shut down new entries, and those already here had no citizenship on the horizon. In a lot of Western towns, there were expulsions and attacks on Chinese neighborhoods. The country got rails and wealth. They got silence. And then comes the hard part. What happened to the ones who stayed? Number 11, 1866. Rural Indiana. The Reno brothers figured out something simple. The train carrying federal mail was a rolling Uncle Sam safe. At night, they boarded as passengers, took control of the crew, and made the engineer pull the locomotive away from the station, leaving the most valuable cars isolated. With no telegraph nearby and no sheriff getting there fast, they broke into the mail cargo and disappeared with close to $13,000. The message spread. You could rob a bank on the move. In the post-Civil War years, a lot of drifting people copied the plan. When the Renos got caught, the ending didn't wait for a trial. The railroads answered by hiring detectives like Pinkerton, and the hunt turned into a national business. That's where the part most people don't remember starts. Number 12, Hell's Court. In the late 19th century, the federal court in Fort Smith, Arkansas, became national talk. The man running it was Isaac Charles Parker, the hanging judge. From his bench came decisions on crimes out of Indian Territory, a huge area where federal deputies spent days hunting fugitives. For 14 years, anyone sentenced to death had no right to appeal. Parker signed 160 death sentences. 79 ended at the fort's gallows. On execution day, the yard filled up early. There was nervous noise and then a hard silence. Here's the detail most people don't know. Parker said he'd rather do away with the death penalty, but claimed he was stuck with the law. That contradiction is what keeps people wondering. Was it justice, or just a way to keep the chaos in check? Number 13. By the late 19th century, when the West was still dust, telegraphs, and law made up on the fly, almost nobody remembers Laura Bullion. She wasn't some outlaw's girlfriend. She really was part of the Wild Bunch, Butch Cassidy's crew, and she did the work that keeps a gang alive, carrying messages, hiding money, passing around fake bills, and disappearing before the sheriff or the Pinkertons showed up. When she had to, she'd cut her hair, change her name, and lay low in another town. In 1901, she was arrested and did time back east. After she got out, she worked at a hotel and kept her past hush-hush. Whatever she knew about the gang's last moves, she took with her. Years later, with cars on the street and the radio on, she dodged questions. Why so careful? Who could still be listening? Number 14. By the late 19th century, New Mexico was still frontier land. Elfego Baca was 19 and decided to act like the sheriff in a mostly Mexican village where Texas cowboys showed up acting like they owned the place. He arrested one of them, and, a few hours later, an armed group, people say nearly 80 men, surrounded the house where he'd holed up. The shooting ran through the night and into the next day for more than 30 hours. Some accounts talk about more than 4,000 shots fired. When it finally went quiet, Baca walked out, barely hurt. On the other side, There were dead and wounded. And the most interesting part came later. In court, he ended up on trial, but he turned it around and walked free before trading his holster for a suit. One detail from the trial, hardly remembered, explains why this story never died in saloon talk. Number 15. At the tail end of the Old West, when the train and the telegraph were already tightening the net, Pearl Hart, a Canadian in Arizona, decided to go off the rails. In 1899, near Globe, she dressed like a man, carried a .38 revolver, and ordered a stagecoach to stop. She took around $430 and vanished before the dust settled. What lit people up wasn't just the money, but who was giving the orders. A woman committing a crime a lot of folks called men's work. The newspapers turned her into a headline. In court, she got 5 years, but she didn't stay locked up long. They let her out early, saying jail wasn't a place for a lady. After that, her trail turns to fog. Number 16. In 1890, in Tombstone, Arizona, a short item ran in the Tombstone epitaph. 2 men swore that out in the desert they shot down a giant winged creature, something we'd call a pterosaur today, not the exact pterodactyl. They said they strapped the body to a platform and posed next to it so there'd be no doubt. In the Old West, news and jokes sometimes rode the same train, and small papers lived on grabbing attention. But here's the weird part. That record disappears from archives, collections, and even old copies. Ever since, serious people and legend hunters have been digging through microfilm, auctions, and family basements. It could have been a condor misread, a printing hoax, or something rare. Everybody knows a friend who saw it, but nobody shows it. And if the proof was made to disappear on purpose, who would have had a reason to do that? Number 17. In Boot Hill Cemetery in Tombstone, Arizona, there's a grave that sounds like diner talk on a road trip. The marker reads, Lester Moore, a late 19th century delivery guy, and the story supposedly started with a package that turned into a headache. One side charged, the other talked back, and within minutes the talk turned into a fight, and the fight turned into a shootout. 4 shots from a .44, and that was it. No doctor, no help, just dust and people watching from a distance. The sheriff showed up afterward like usual. What stuck was a blunt epitaph, almost a pun. After 4 shots, there was no les left. To this day, people stop there, tip their hat, and wonder what was in that package that made it a death sentence. And then comes the question, who pulled the trigger first, and what was so important in that package? Number 18. In 1856, at the height of the gold rush, a guy named Richard H. Barter, Rattlesnake Dick, went down in history the wrong way. His gang hit a Wells Fargo mule train and made off with around $80,000 in gold bars, the kind of money that could change a last name forever. With sheriffs and armed posses on his trail, he supposedly buried part of the loot along the routes between the Trinity Mountains and the Sierra, leaving markers only he knew how to read. A cut in stone, a scarred tree, distance in miles. Later, a rough sketch map showed up, full of arrows and crooked math, passed hand to hand in saloons and ranches. But Barter died in 1859, and the X was left with no owner. And what if the secret is somewhere so ordinary that everyone walks right by and never notices? Number 19. January 1919. In a small Nevada town, the Old West was already turning into movie history, and the war had ended elsewhere. But out there, the habit of settling it in the street still lived on. 2 men with an old grudge set a meeting on Main Street, each with a worn revolver and little patience. Shops half closed their doors, people stayed glued to the windows, and nobody wanted to play the hero. They traded only what was necessary, the kind of, "You know why I'm here." A hand went to the holster, the shot cracked, and in seconds both men were on the ground. The sheriff showed up when it was already too late. The doctor could only write down what he saw. The next day, the newspaper turned it into bar talk. The scene got a detail nobody forgot. A Model T rolled down the street honking, like a sign the town had turned the page. Number 20. The West just changed its address. In 1890, the government said the frontier was closed, but it just moved on the map. It left the Dakotas and showed up on Wall Street, in real estate, in big oil, and today on the screens where we buy and sell with a click. Back then, railroads and the telegraph called the shots. Now it's fiber cables and algorithms. Instead of the saloon, the conference table. Instead of the sheriff, the regulatory agency. The showdown became contracts, lawsuits, and lobbying. The corral became zoning, drilling permits, and terms of service. The gold rush became a race for water, energy, and data. And like always, the fight is between the people living on Main Street and the ones pulling the strings on Wall Street. What signs of that do you see in today's headlines?